everyone. We are now on to the integumentary system. So to start off with, let's talk about, well, what does that mean? What organs are included in the integumentary system? So the biggest part of the integumentary system is going to be your skin. And yes, the skin is an organ. I know that we tend to think of organs as sort of things that are inside of your body, and the skin's just sort of the external covering. But remember that an organ is a collection of tissues that provides a particular function for the body. Okay, so yes, the skin is an organ, and in fact, it's the largest organ of the body, right? It covers a lot of surface area, and in fact, it makes up about 8% of our total body weight. So it's a rather large organ with some very specific tissue types involved in it, and we're going to talk about that today. Okay, so the integumentary system is mostly the skin, but it also includes some accessory organs such as hair and nails, and then glands that are associated with the skin. So those would be endocrine glands associated with the skin. So we'll talk about sebaceous and sweat glands today too. So for the general function of the integumentary system, so think about all the things that your skin does for you. The biggest piece is just to simply provide a lot of protection and a lot of different types of protection as well. So think about it like this. You have abrasion, all of those external environments, all of that coming at you. You have chemicals, you got pathogens, you got all this stuff coming at you. Your skin is going to protect you from that. It also is important for preventing water loss because the skin is keratinized. And as we talked about, when we talked about epithelial tissues, the keratin is a protein that helps, it's waterproof protein, and it'll help prevent water loss and help prevent it from changes in the environment as well. Okay, so pathogens, trauma, abrasion, all those things, everything that you put your body through, your skin is going to help protect you from all of that. It also has a lot of sensory neurons embedded in it, and so that's going to provide all of your sensation. So what organ system is it going to have a relationship with? Okay, so that's going to be the nervous system. And so again, I put this in here to highlight the fact that even though we kind of teach different organ systems as if they're sort of distinct and separate, they have a lot of overlap and a lot of integration. Okay, and we have excretion, things like sweat. We'll talk about that more when we get there. The sweat helps with regulating your temperature. You also have blood vessels in your dermis, and that's going to help with temperature regulation as well. And this is also where you're going to have your loose adipose connective tissue, which is primarily for energy storage as well as for packaging. And this is where you're going to make vitamin D, and vitamin D is very important for putting the calcium into the bone matrix, and so that's going to be connected to what other organ system? That's going to integrate with the skeletal system as well. Okay, so a lot of good functions going on with that skin. Okay, now let's talk about the layers. And for the layers, one thing to understand is that there are 3 main layers, and then from there, we're going to talk about some sub-layers. So you really want to try to keep this organized for yourself. I suggest that you create some sort of tree diagram that helps group and organize the information, because it can be kind of overwhelming if you're not looking at it in a structured, organized way. Okay, so you need to know how those subcategories fit into these 3 main layers. Okay, so the 3 layers are the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. And I really like the way that these names reflect it. So in the middle, I think of like a little sandwich. In the middle here, we have the dermis. Okay, so that is going to be that big fat layer in the middle. And then above it is the epidermis. So what does epi mean? We've seen this before. Epithelium, epi, above. So the epidermis is going to be the layer that is above the dermis, right? So if you don't have epi on your little prefix and root list, go ahead and add it. And then underneath the dermis would be the hypodermis. Hypo means below. So it's got this perfect kind of mirroring here. You got the dermis in the middle, and then above it is the epidermis, and below it is the hypodermis. Okay, the hypodermis is sometimes referred to as the subcutaneous level because technically in a lot of textbooks do not include the hypodermis with the skin, but for me, I'm going to group them together. So epidermis on the top, dermis in the middle, hypodermis on underneath, like the subfloor underground. Okay, so what this little lecture piece is going to be mostly concerned with is looking at that epidermis and identifying the 5 different layers of the epidermis. Okay, so when we look at the epidermis, notice that this is a surface. So here's some free space right here. What tissue type is this? Okay, so remembering back to the tissue lectures, once we identify it as an epithelium, because it's at a surface, the next thing is, well, how many layers are it? 1 or lots of them? So there are lots of them. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that the outer layer of our skin would have lots and lots of layers of cells? Its job is for protection. And so the more layers you have, the better it is at protection. So think about it as, you know, if you scrape a couple off, you have some scrapes there, you still have a lot of layers. Okay, so it's going to be stratified so that it can be better for protection. And then the second piece of the name is squamous. And squamous, remember, relates to the shape of the cells. And remember that you want to look at the top surface, not at the bottom surface, because they have more of a cuboidal type shape at the bottom. So apical surface are squamous, and therefore we have squamous. So I need you to know that the epidermis is made up of the specific tissue type, stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, so notice the words I use. The layer is the epidermis, and the specific tissue type of the epidermis that the epidermis is made out of is stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, and as an epithelial tissue, it's going to have no blood vessels, and it's just tightly packed cells. Okay, so again, good for protection. Now, what we're going to go through now is within the layer of epidermis, we're going to look at the 5 sublayers within the epidermis. Okay, so that's what we're going to go through. So I like to start at the bottom. And the reason I like to start at the bottom is because this is how the skin is going to be growing and regenerating itself bottom up. So along the very bottom here, we have a layer of fat cuboidal cells, and those are stem cells. What is a stem cell? A stem cell is a cell that undergoes, it regenerates, it makes copies of itself. So it's gonna undergo mitosis, and it's going to make multiple copies of itself. And as it makes multiple copies, it'll push the cells on top of it up and up. Okay, so those stem cells, the ones that regenerate your skin, as you lose cells at the top, you're going to regenerate from the bottom up. Okay, this layer is called the stratum basale. So let's look at that. So stratum just means layer. You're going to notice that they all are called stratum something, but basale is relating to like base, as in the bottom. Okay, so I need you to know that it is on the bottom here, excuse me, and I need you to know that that's where you're going to find those stem cells, whose job it is to make more cells for the skin. Okay, so that's how you grow and regenerate your skin as you lose cells from the top. Stratum basale. The next one up from that, okay, so it's more superficial to that, we're going to have the stratum spinosum. And the key to understanding the name for this layer is to understand the backstory of where it comes from. So if you take a section of the skin, so a little tiny biopsy of the skin, and you put it onto a slide, and you prepare that slide and make a slide from that tissue, what happens to the cells is that they're going to kind of shrink away from each other a little bit. And that's pretty normal for when you're making a tissue. But when you look at these cells that are in this layer, they're spiny. They look like they have these little spines between them, like spiky all over. And the reason for that is because these cells making up the inner epidermis, their job is to hold tightly to all of the cells around them. They have a special type of cell junction called a desmosome. And a desmosome is a junction where you have protein filaments sticking out and anchoring deep into all of the neighboring cells so that they're really, really held tightly together. Okay, so that helps prevent shearing forces so that they stay nice and tight together. Okay, and again, good for protection. So nice barrier. So each one of these little spikies here, those just represent the desmosomes between the cells. So this is what we call an artifact in histology, which just means that it's something that looks like something real. It looks like you have spiny cells, but in reality, it's just from the process of fixing and preparing that tissue, okay? But when you look at it, because of those little spines created by the desmosomes as the cells shrink away from each other during the preparation process, they look spiny, and therefore this is the stratum spinosum. And I remember that because the cells are spiny. Okay, so the stratum spinosum is going to be this thick layer right here, and this is where you're going to see nice kind of solid looking cells all compact and jammed together. Okay, that's the stratum spinosum. Now, on top of the stratum spinosum, so again, more superficial to that, now we're going to have what's called the stratum granulosum. And again, this comes from the appearance of the cells when you're looking at it under the microscope. So in the microscope, you'll have a kind of thin layer of dark staining cells. And those dark staining cells, the reason they're dark like that is because they have particular granules in them. And those granules or grains, what they do is they're secreting keratin. So that's where you're going to contain this keratin. And you'll notice that they're going to have more and more keratin as they get closer and closer to the surface of the epidermis. Okay? So because of the presence of those granules containing that keratin, they're very dark. They have granules. So that is the name, that is why the stratum granulosum is called that, granulosum, because of the presence of the granules. And again, it'll be the dark flattened cells further up from the stratum spinosum. Okay, stratum granulosum. The next one is the stratum lucidum. Now, it's important to understand that the stratum lucidum is not found all over the skin. It's only found in specific areas where you have thick skin. So those would be like your palms of your hands and fingertips. Okay, that's nice and thick. And then all things like the bottom of your foot. Okay, so it's only going to be present in thick skin. So most of the skin is going to only have 4 layers because the stratum lucidum is not going to be present. Okay, so let's again talk about the name, lucidum. So lucy means clear or light. Okay, so the stratum lucidum is going to be the layer right above the stratum granulosum, where it looks very light stained, just like a line of light colored cells. Okay, that is the stratum lucidum, and again, only found in thick skin like the soles of your feet and the palms of your hands. Okay, moving on to the stratum corneum. Okay, so the stratum corneum is going to be the outermost layer, the most superficial layer, and the thickness of the stratum corneum is going to depend on where you are taking the skin from. So, you know, thick skin going to have much thicker than thinner skin, like your neck, very thin. Okay, so important to understand is, remember that we created the cells way down here, and as they've been pushed up and up and up from making new cells underneath them, they're going to get more and more keratin, right? So you'll have more and more keratin as you go up, up, up. And so by the time they get to the stratum corneum, they're what we call fully keratinized, which just means that they're not really cells anymore. They're dead. They're dead cells, and the reason for that is because they've been so jam-packed with this keratin, they're just basically sacks of keratin now. Okay, so now we have this nice thick layer on the top here where you just have dead cells filled with keratin, and that creates a really nice watertight barrier that helps protect and keep the moisture in and keep the, you know, environment out. Okay, so that's the stratum corneum. So I do want to also mention a little bit about the name. So the word cornu means horns. And so to help me remember that, I also like to think about cornu cutaneum, which is just a variation, I don't know about disorder, but a variation where you get little skin horns where you have compacted keratinized growth. So if you think about like goats and, you know, things with horns, those growths just come from compacted keratin, which is the same protein found in your hair as well. So I just think of that, this is the top fully keratinized one at the top, similar, you know, same type of protein that makes up those horns. And that brings me back to the idea of stratum corneum. That's the outermost layer with fully keratinized dead cells. Okay, so let's do a little quick review. So what I want you to do right now is to go ahead and pause the video like you've done hopefully before, and try and just get a piece of paper on the same, or maybe even this within your notes as you've already been taking notes, and just try to answer these questions. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you got those all figured out. Let's start answering them. So which layer of the epidermis, remember these are all part of the epidermis, which layer only has those dead cells? That would be the stratum corneum, and the stratum corneum is going to be that fully keratinized cells right at the top. Which one has flat cells that are dark staining and filled with granules? It's right in the name. Stratum granulosum. Which one is going to generate the new cells to regenerate the cell? That's going to be stratum basale. Remember, you grow from the bottom up. Which one is fully keratinized? So number 1 and number 4 are basically the same question, and so that would also be stratum corneum. That's why they're dead. They're filled with keratin. And number 5, which one is only found in the thick skin? That would be stratum lucidum. And so if stratum lucidum is present, that means that you must be looking at thick skin. That's a hint for later. Number 6 is which one has a single layer of fat square cells. So remember, most of the cells are going to be squamous in shape, or thinner, flatter, I mean. So the ones that are nice and cube at the bottom, that would be the stratum basale. And the deepest layer, again, would be the stratum basale. Okay, so I'm going to do this during our Zoom, little Zoom meeting. Okay, so maybe go ahead and start thinking about what would be a good mnemonic device that would help you memorize the layers of the epidermis. And one thing to think about it is because that the epidermis is always going to be, you know, intact. Okay, so you will have an order, and anytime you're trying to memorize information in a particular order, a good way to do that is to create a mnemonic device where you use, you know, the first letter in some sort of memorable phrase.